Hey everyone, the Revoice Conference is coming up very quickly, October 6th through the 8th. On the night of October 6th, we will be doing a live recording of our season finale, the whole Life on Side B co-host team, right after our very own Elizabeth speaks at the opening session of Revoice. We are super excited. It's going to be a great time. If you are going to Revoice, please come and join us after the main session at night. And we will have a good old time finishing out this season. Also, if you're going to be at Revoice, we are going to have some special merch that we will have for sale that will only be available at Revoice. So it's going to be a really great time. Come join us. We can't wait to see you.
Hey everyone, this is Becca. I want to remind you that Life on Side B is a ministry of Posture Shift, a missiological ministry equipping church leaders and parents on LGBT plus inclusion and care. You can learn more about their awesome work at postureshift.com. Also, we want to thank all of our patrons who keep the podcast going and growing through their continued giving. If you love this podcast, we would love for you to consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/lifeonsideb. Now, on to the episode.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Life on Side B. This is Henry, and Grant is co-hosting this episode with me.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. It's the beginning of the school year, so I'm already reading so much and taking classes, and I love school, so I'm in a very good mood. How about you?
Okay, back to the books, reading books and people. I love that for you.
Yes.
I am well. I am currently entering a busy season of work, but I had some downtime this afternoon. So I was deep cleaning my house, and now I stopped to do this. But
Yeah.
I'm very excited for this episode. Listeners, we have our friend Gabriel here with us today to talk about, obviously, faith and sexuality, and then just another topic that we don't often get to talk about in the Side B community, or just even rather like with this generation of queer people, we don't talk about the situation topic as much. So the conversation topic today is HIV and living with HIV. And so, Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on to speak with us. And welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. If we want to just dive right in, could you tell us just a little bit about your story, just with faith and sexuality, and what that journey has looked like for you? And obviously tell us how you identify.
Sure. I identify as gay, non-binary male, he, they pronouns. Okay, where to start? It all started about 4.6 billion years ago when they... No. I mean, it did.
Got a drink, girl. It's going to be a long one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing I love more than the sound of my own voice. I grew up in an evangelical household. My dad has been a lapsed Catholic since before he and my mother met, I think. But my mother became an evangelical Presbyterian a little while after she married my father. And so she raised me and my sisters in that tradition, the PCA, with which some of you may be familiar. May the Lord bless and keep the PCA.
Yes.
Anyway, but yeah, that was the denomination I grew up in. It's the denomination that I learned to love Jesus and the Bible in. And it was the denomination that at 13 years old, I realized I was gay in. One of those stories that it was like as unfunny as possible at the time, but Tragedy Plus has absolutely given me some what do you call it? I had not really articulated to myself what it was that I pretty much literally wanted to see. until I was about 13. I snuck down in the middle of the night and found an internet account that didn't have parental controls on it, and looked up porn. And that was how I figured out that I was gay. And then after a couple of hours, I snuck back up into my bed and I laid awake praying and crying and being like, holy shit, my life is on a completely different trajectory from anything I ever thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so I had about one partly sleepless night's worth of time to process before I got to talk to my mother about my sexuality, because I didn't know what a browsing history was.
Oh no!
That's one of the first things I learned about the internet.
It was a rough morning.
Oh no! Yeah.
So yeah. It wasn't long after that, like a few months, I think, that I eventually wound up getting enrolled in ex-gay counseling. It was not as bad as it could have been. Like, it wasn't some horrible camp or anything, anything that creepy. But it was pretty bad. Among other things, and partly just so that we don't have to have a ton of trigger warnings, I won't go into a ton of detail about this, but I did experience abuse from an older man when I was still a teenager. Among other things, the ex-gay counselor who was counseling me, when he found out that I had not told him about this, yelled at me about it.
Oh.
Yeah. I had a distorted view of God for being afraid to talk about it. It was special.
Okay.
Yeah. So around the time when I was maybe 19, I had sort of settled into, no, you know what? I'm just kind of still gay, and that seems like it's just gonna be a thing. I had never been completely sold on the ex-gay narrative. I was willing to accept it sort of provisionally, like, okay, the adults in the room seem to find this persuasive. I have questions, but I'll go with it for the present, and maybe I'll understand later. And no. It turned out it was just a bad idea. Which would be less annoying if we had not already known that it was a bad idea from the foregoing, 2.5 decades. But
for sure, yes. It's kind of embarrassing at that point. Yeah, this is still a bad idea, everybody.
Nothing good will come from it.
But so yeah, around that same time is when I was starting to think really seriously about Catholicism. Because I mean, quite apart from all of the art, the history, the literature, the mysticism, I mean, there is a point at which, keeping a gay man away from all of the incense and lace, you're going to need a pointy end stick.
The resonance. Yes.
And in fact,
I can't with both of y'all on that.
And in fact, today I am a member of the only subgroup in the Catholic Church that is gayer than the traditional Latin Mass fandom, which is the Ordinariate.
That's the Ordinariate. Yes. Yes. That's true, yeah.
So yeah, when I was in college, I finally reached the point where, I had studied the theology, the history, all of that, and the Catholic Church seemed like the best representation of what Christ seemed to have set up in the first century. And so I took the plunge. That
Yeah.
was 14 years ago and change now. Easter of 2008. I thought for a while about the priesthood or the religious life. Eventually, partly with the help of a very gifted spiritual director, I determined that those things were not for me. And
Mhm.
I am now pretty glad that I made that determination because, well, I love Mama Church, but let's be honest, the last thing she needs right now is another priest who can't keep it in her hand.
Mhm.
Oh
So,
my god, this episode.
yeah.
100% great.
So, that's kind of where I find myself faith-wise. I had kind of a weird journey as far as my view of the church as a human institution. Growing up Reformed, I always had took a dim view of the human institution of the church. Because, like, as much as Reformed believers consider participation in the church important and indeed obligatory, they're also very much, human beings suck. The church will
Mhm.
suck most of the
Mhm.
time and in most of the ways.
Mhm.
Um, and so I came into the church with, a belief in God's strictly supernatural guidance of her teaching of it, but a lot of skepticism about like the actual human conduct of her ministers. Um, I then had a nice few years of getting lulled into a false sense of security because what kind of insane institution would, have the whole abuse scandal that we've had for the last 20 years? We hit the 20th anniversary this year. What a lovely grace now.
Mhm.
But like, what institution would do that and then not learn from it? That would be crazy.
Yeah.
Um, so I did kind of drink the Kool-Aid a little bit in that respect. And then 2016, 2017, and finally 2018. Um, those were some pretty rough years. And basically, I've
Yeah.
now wound up back at the back at the attitude to the institutional church that I entered the Catholic faith with.
Yeah.
Like you're infallible when you need to be. Sure, literally every other
Yeah.
thing can and will go wrong
Yeah.
with
That makes
alacrity.
sense. Mhm.
Right. I guess that is the. I guess that is the that part. Um,
Yeah. That's the gist. Um.
am I leaving anything out?
No, I think that was it.
Yeah.
That kind of set us up for the next question.
We we would like to hear a little bit more specifically about your journey when it comes to HIV. I know that's been a part of your experience. So, how does that fit into what you shared with us already?
Mm-hmm.
And before you start that, I want to say thank you for even having this conversation. It is a gift you're doing. A lot of people would
Absolutely.
not want to step into this. And so I have a lot of
Absolutely.
respect and a lot of care just for what you're about to talk about. So just thank you for that.
Yeah. It
Thank
truly
you.
is a huge, huge gift. So we're so thankful. I didn't mean to rush in. I just, I'm interested to hear. Tell me more.
Yes, me too, girl. Me and you both.
Right. Well then. Uh, I was diagnosed in the summer of 2020. Um, so I feel like I was, leaning into the theme of the year, but like giving it a little gay twist.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Sure. Uh-huh.
yeah, if it's determined later on that that joke is quite simply too tasteless, do feel free to cut it out.
We're okay with tasteless. I mean, Henry's a co-host.
Oh, shots fired. Okay.
Just kidding.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
Well,
Just know that I'm seeing you in October and November, so I'll have a lot of chance to
That's true.
retaliate. So.
Yes.
I mean,
Anyway,
I feel like the
2020.
fundamental principle of all camp is tastelessness, but at the same time, like I'm the kind of person who's who feels that yes, Milo Yiannopoulos should have been fired, but the joke that they actually fired him over was fucking funny. I'm sorry. I digress. So yeah, I was diagnosed in the summer of 2020. It was, I won't say the culmination, but I guess a milestone in something that has kind of been a feature of my side B life, which is I am not great at being side B. um, I feel like I feel like it's something that doesn't necessarily get talked about in side B spaces a lot, and there can be a lot of good reasons for that. One of them being that it's so easy from the outside to only see the negatives of celibacy and think of it as this lonely, burdensome thing. And so naturally, you get people like you, Grant, people like Bridget, who find immense fulfillment in it, and want to share that, and that's great. And
I love how he didn't list me in that. He did not list me. Okay, because there's not a lot of fulfillment in it. So I'll be honest about that one.
But yeah, obviously for, I would say probably most gay people, struggling with being chaste is not really what their life is about. For me, it kind of has been, which is not necessarily that's a sound instinct on my part either, but it has in fact taken up a lot of territory in my mind, and I have not been a good boy. So because a lot of our time tends to get spent on the positives, I feel like at least some of us, certainly me, kind of feel awkward about sharing the, I guess I want to say sharing the stereotypes that people expect about our lives.
Yeah.
The assumptions that a lot of people make, and the reasons that they think that this is going to be, lonely and burdensome. Yeah. Sometimes people think that for some kind of shallow reasons, and for some reasons that are, honestly, yeah, kind of obsessed with sex, or at least unduly preoccupied.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some people feel that way.
For sure.
And I think both for those reasons, those reasons of feeling like we need to maintain the image of the group, but also because, it's kind of uncomfortable to admit, I have these convictions and my life does not line up with what I think it should line up with. And, that's not fun to admit. In fact, depending on your context, it can be pretty scary to admit.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't really speak to churches in other cultures, but I feel like the American church in most denominations is kind of particularly bad about that. That there is I think the way I'd put it is there's a hostility to bad Catholics in the American church that historically has not really been a thing.
Yeah.
And I take bad Catholics as an example, but you can find the same thing in Protestant traditions, although Rome is more famous for it. But you see it constantly from sort of self-appointed Catholic conservatives that oh, well, if so-and-so isn't going to live the teaching of the church, or doesn't believe this or that or the other thing, why don't they just leave, or they're Catholic in name only, or whatever. Well, like, there is a lot of pressure to at least pretend that you have it together and that you're telling the
Yeah.
right line. And I really just don't think that that's helpful. In fact, I think it's destructive spiritually.
Yeah.
Because, like, all spiritual progress depends on telling the truth. Like, if you won't face the actual fact of,
Please say that back again. Please just say that again, because I got somebody in my life who needs to hear that.
all,
Myself too.
but just if you can't or won't face the actual facts of your life, you cannot progress. It is not
Yeah.
possible, because you are not
Yeah.
living in reality in that case.
I'm writing that down, baby, up in my notes.
That's good. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I do think like there's maybe a unique pressure for side B folks to like present ourselves as spiritual exemplars,
Mhm.
like sort of like sexless superheroes of the faith. And so
which,
and that's
nah.
and yeah, and that's because like I mean there's I think a lot of people assume so much about us, and there's like this desire to defend ourselves by
Mhm.
Absolutely.
saying, actually, we're not the worst, we're the best. And
Yes.
which is neither of them are true. So
No.
yeah, I understand that pressure to like to want to present a curated image.
Yes.
So
Which then also even adds to the LGBTQ conversation in terms of we're the good gays versus the bad gays. Like, let's say, like,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh well,
Nothing drives
yeah.
me up the wall like the way people try to, like, I refer to it as mascotting. The way people will pick up, sometimes side B people. I think more often ex-gay people, or people sort of that lie between ex-gay and side B. The way that they will, they turn us into mascots. They put us on a pedestal, and like, that can eventually get pretty scary if you're like, am I allowed to have standard issue human faults, or is that about to get me thrown out by these people?
Yeah, it's
Because we're a flashpoint in a
uncomfortable.
culture war, and it sucks.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable to find yourself appearing as like a brick in the wall of someone's theology. Like, oh,
Come on,
I can believe this because this person does this well.
come on.
It's like,
Okay.
but what if I don't? What if I don't do it well?
I talk about that all the time. Okay, girls, I'm gonna just share. Like, this summer, like, I kissed a guy, and Katy Perry. But anyways, so I kissed a guy, and I did like it, but it was just like, so obviously, like, I let people know in my life who like hold me accountable and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Like, it wasn't planned; it just kind of happened, kind of thing. But like, I was like, oh my gosh, now they're gonna think I'm less of a believer. As if straight people don't do crazy. Like, am I not allowed to stumble? Or like Grant said, like, I don't want to be a brick. Oh well, if Henry did that, then like, you know what? Your faith should not be shaken just because I did something or not. That's why whenever people were running to their fainting couches years ago, when two of our friends got married, and I was like, your faith should not be dependent on whether Anthony and Kyle are side B or anything anymore. But I mean, people are running to their faint accounts, and I was like, that kind of pressure is not healthy for us as believers.
To use two random names that
I mean,
no relationship.
girl, you know good well they would not care. Okay, you know Anthony Trent would not care one bit.
That actually touches on.
You
Okay.
can,
Oh, sorry.
No, you go. Yeah.
no, great.
Well,
Yeah,
that actually
Josh, you can do
touches
whatever
on.
you want with the names.
That actually touches on one of my other huge frustrations with the whole mascotting thing I,
Let's go.
is that I hate the way so many people will use side B, especially, uh, as a pretext to dump on side A people. Like,
Yes.
obviously, I came to the conclusion that side A theology isn't correct. If I hadn't, I would be side A. But, like, the fact that I've come to X conclusion about theology does not mean that you get to act like someone else's convictions aren't sincere. That is not okay. You don't get to make that kind of decision about someone else's theology. And you certainly don't get to use it to govern their conscience. It's appalling.
Mm.
As far as I can see, the reason that people use side B like that is just in order to, crowbar us away from the rest of the gay community and divide it. And like, no,
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
not gonna use me like that. Uh, with HIV especially, but also with stuff like being able to walk down the street. It is absolutely the LGBT community that has made 99% of the improvements in what my life is today over
Mhm.
what it would have been in 1972.
Mhm. Mhm.
There are a lot of things that I love the church for and I'm grateful to the church for. She has done basically nothing to improve the actual day-to-day lives of queer people since Stonewall.
And that's that on
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm absolutely not ever going to renounce my debt to the rest of the gay community or throw them under the
Isn't that
bus.
crazy,
That's
Gabriel?
not okay.
Sometimes I think about that, and where when people are like, "Why do you identify as gay?" or "Why do you even like don't have an issue with pride as a believer?" or something like that. I'm like, the very fact that you can say that statement or ask that question is due to the history of what the gay community has gone through and been through. Like, we would not be able to be side B so comfortably if it hadn't even been for the way that secular gay community, queer community as a whole,
Yeah.
has allowed us to live however we want. Like, it's insane to think otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love I love how you said live side B so comfortably. I'm like, yes, it's so comfortable.
I mean,
But you
we've
know
been living
what?
it this comfortably.
But you know what I meant, girl. Because
No.
actually, you're right. It's really not comfortable existence at all. I don't think I've ever used that word to describe this experience.
So comfortable.
So freely, I guess. So we're not forced to live it. So yeah, that's
Well,
like
yeah,
part of
Yeah.
what I meant.
and like I have absolutely found because like a lot of my friends are gay and or trans, which yeah, we travel in packs. Shocker. Um, but but like I have absolutely found by experience that like for every one queer person who has a problem with my faith, like there are a minimum of 200 Christians who are going to tell me that I can't even be a Christian because I used the word gay.
Uh-huh.
Like the gay community is way more accepting of me as a celibate person, or well, a celibate end quote person than
Uh-huh.
the church is of me as a fellow believer. Like it's ridiculous. And like the
That's
stuff that
interesting.
if I'm gonna start ranting, I need to cool my jets.
That's okay.
Yes, let's not get too off course here because we'll be having conversation for days.
It's
Yep.
true.
Okay. And
I
so, I know grain bread.
well I do wonder we touched on this a little bit, but um what do you think are the obstacles to side B people discussing HIV in
Mm.
particular, um, or to maybe even to relating to um, the topic at all. I feel like there's weird cross pressures in that, like, for a lot of Christians, we're sort of automatically associated with HIV and AIDS just by virtue of the fact of being gay.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and there's also so much shame associated with being HIV positive as a person pursuing celibacy. Like, what is that? What are all those pressures like? How would you describe them? What are the obstacles? Maybe that's a little unformed of a question, but would you like to discuss some of that with
No,
us?
yeah, I'm happy to. I will preface this by saying that in some ways I kind of feel like I don't know. Because, like, the way I
Okay.
approach my diagnosis is that it is something like private but not secret, I think is probably the best way of
Mm-hmm.
putting it. Because, like, obviously it is very personal. For a while, I did treat it as secret. Not because I was worried about, being shamed or anything. Story for another time, but after a particular experience in my parish's Facebook group of all ridiculous places, um, I'm kind of over the shame thing. Like, it's whatever. Um, but for a while, I was dead set against the idea of my parents finding out. Because
Mm.
my parents, like, the way they met was that they both did theater in California in the 70s. So
Okay.
they met some gay people. It's a thing that happened.
Sure, sure.
And, like, they had
Mm-hmm.
close friends who died of HIV. Like, I didn't want to, you know, I was worried that they would, like, worry themselves to death over this.
Yeah.
Eventually, particularly with my sister's support, I decided to go ahead and tell them. But so for that reason, um, even though I'm a general blabbermouth, especially about myself, I haven't really been that public with my diagnosis outside of a fairly small circle. But where I am with it
Mm-hmm.
now is, like I said, sort of private but not secret is kind of the vibe. Um,
Yeah.
but so for that reason, like, the social aspect of stigma or shame or whatever, or like specifically homophobic associations with HIV, that type of thing, it isn't really something that I've experienced. Like, my whole
Okay.
experience with this disease has been profoundly different from what I think
Mm.
most positive people's has been. I mean, like, I
Mhm.
got my diagnosis something like 2 weeks after I got it. And, like, within another couple of weeks,
Oh,
I was
wow.
undetectable. Which,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
like, for people who aren't familiar, and this is still kind of something that is making its way into the general consciousness. But to have an undetectable viral load means that um, like, it basically means that for all practical purposes, you're negative. Like, if I were bi instead of gay, I could
Yeah.
conceive a child and it would be fine. Like, that's how good the
Yeah.
medicine is today. Um, it's still not a cure. Still working on that. Um, but, like, it is so far from being the 1980s. Um,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but so yeah, a lot of the social aspect um is just profoundly different for me than it has been for my gay forebears. Um, and, like, I do actually kind of appreciate the feeling of like, a little bit more of a connection to the history of the gay community in this country. Um,
Mm.
but I mean, the connection is a little bit I don't know, honorary maybe. Because I mean, like, all I have to
Yeah.
do is take my Biktarvy every morning, and that's it. Like, I am not balancing
Mhm.
stuff like, well, I can take this extremely toxic medicine that my insurance doesn't cover, or I can slowly waste
Yeah.
away in front of everyone that I love. Like, it is completely different from what it was 40
Yeah.
years ago, or even 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Like, it's no longer this like death sentence that people were just like,
Yeah.
oh, automatically this happens and bam.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is something I
I
do
mean,
wonder
hell,
about,
I've had
though,
gonorrhea.
Gabriel, is
This.
Sir, sir.
um
Oh my god.
no, it's fine.
Grant and
It's
I are
fine,
doing a
but
lot of active listening on this
it's
episode.
fine, but I've got a question. um Something that I have experienced, and I think a lot of side B people who desire a connection to the broader LGBTQ community have experienced, is a kind of pushback, because it seems to many that we don't have the cred to really identify as a part of the broader LGBTQ community. And um, it strikes me that um, weirdly, and I'm sure that this is offensive to many people, but like,
Power through
this
it.
is cred. um, yeah, like this makes a connection more sort of undeniable. But how do you balance thinking about it that way, and then also, I mean, it's not a good thing to like. It's not a good thing to have. It's not like, I don't know. Do we celebrate? Like, it's just complicated. It feels like you do have a strong connection, a visceral connection, in a way that I don't have. But it's also bad. Like, it's like, how do you, I hope I'm not being offensive.
No,
I'm
no.
trying to understand the dynamics there.
I mean, obviously, I can only speak for myself. Or, well, I should
Mhm.
only speak for myself. There are plenty of people who. Anyway. I mean, I don't devote a lot of headspace to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just because I have the luxury of not needing to.
Yeah.
I am, and I don't know how much of this just comes from my personality and how much of it comes from my theology and what. I am very much a every mushroom cloud has its silver lining type of person.
Oh my gosh.
I
Yeah.
can't claim credit
Okay.
for that one. That's Owl City. This conversation isn't
Okay.
gay
Oh,
enough.
yes.
But you know, feeling this or that or the other way wouldn't make me not have HIV. So I kind of feel comfortable being like, well, here I am. I'm going to,
Yeah.
take solace in X, or be glad that at least Y.
Mhm.
And, in that way, with that, realization, it does honestly feel kind of nice to have a physical connection with some of the people who have gone before me
Mhm.
and fought for my right to be recognized as a human being, when a lot of the
Yeah.
people a lot of the exact people who would yell in my face not to define myself by my sexuality are doing exactly that to me all the time.
Yes. Yes.
So that's something that I don't know if take from it is the right way of putting it, but we'll settle for that. That's something that I kind of take for it or bring to it or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do worry a little bit, because like especially with the the supply chain issues that we were dealing with over the last couple of years, like that does impress on my mind. Like my life is virtually unchanged because I have access to Biktarvy. Like if that were interrupted, very different story. For people who don't have that access, whether because they're homeless or don't have insurance for whatever reason, or they live in a place that like the medical care is just not adequate, completely different.
Yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
is not just an ongoing pandemic in the sense that people still get and live with HIV. It's an ongoing pandemic in the sense that people still get and die of HIV when there's medicine right
Yeah.
there that they're not getting because it's not
Yeah.
profitable to give it to them.
Oh, Lord. Now we've reached this part of the conversation where he's just said nothing but facts about the healthcare system. And I mean, it's like its own form of oppression. It's like
Yep.
you are struggling with something, dealing with something, and then there's medicine or stuff available to help you, and then they decide to punish you for it for profit. It's like I really can't even step into that. But everything you just said is 100% correct. But speaking of being correct,
I've got Kropotkin on the shelf. I'll go get it.
Okay. No, interesting thing I was thinking about that we've been seeing obviously pop up is like with this monkeypox and how it's being framed in certain spaces or spheres as like the gay disease and oh no, I can't tell that story on air. Anyways, but how it's being framed as like, okay, this is a gay issue, gay thing, and okay, so there's this tension of like when HIV first came out, it was like just how gay people were treated, and the community was treated just due to AIDS is like horrific beyond. And then there's this tension of a lot of gay people were the ones getting HIV, for example, and not for example, for fact. And then with monkeypox right now, obviously anybody can get any disease. There's no one disease that's like, oh my god, it's only going to target a specific amount of people. That's not how diseases work. But it can be concentrated in certain communities, like monkeypox, for example, seems to be concentrated in a lot of ways in the gay community, the broader gay community. What do you think about that in terms of how queer people are stigmatized for HIV or AIDS, and then now queer people are being stigmatized for monkeypox, and this fear that it creates of gay people, or this hostile environment that rather it opens up to gay people, like, oh, well, this is y'all's fault, this is this, or whatever. Yeah, sorry, I just rambled kind of like Grant. I don't know if any of that was cohesive, but do you want to talk about any of that?
I mean, I'm certainly open to participating in a conversation about it. I don't know how much I have to say about it. Just because, to me, it's kind of, I guess I'd say, familiar in a really boring way. There's a wonderful phrase in Charles Williams's History of Witchcraft, which covers like going all the way back to the Roman Empire. Because I mean, like even back then, there were state authorities, who wanted to rein in any appeals to supernatural powers. And obviously the Christian era, all the way through the early 18th century, there were still executions going on for witchcraft in North America and Europe. But he talks about the transition from the sort of occasional and occasionally dramatic witch trials of the Middle Ages proper to the actual like witch mania, what we would today identify as the witch hunt in both senses during the Renaissance and the Reformation. And what he says is that they had discovered the lesson that it is just as easy and in a general way as profitable to blame someone else rather than to blame oneself for the evil in the world. And then he says, it is always agreeable to hold someone responsible. It is. No
Yeah.
one's immune to it. The thing that
Mhm.
identity politics, for example, helps to highlight is that when you're talking on the scale of a whole society, it's usually going to be minorities who get that in the shorts. Because
Yeah.
it's always
That
easier
part.
to find a scapegoat than it is to like collectively repent as a nation. Both
Yeah.
because we can't actually control what anybody else does, and because most of us, most of the time, don't particularly want to repent of things. Because repentance is embarrassing and it means not doing fun stuff. The fact that the fun stuff is bad
Uh-huh.
doesn't necessarily make us want to repent of it. That's not how sins work.
Sure, sure.
Um, and,
Hmm.
you know, almost everybody, I mean, except Ace and Demi people, I guess, so you guys are excused. Um, almost everybody struggles with sexual sin of one kind or another. Which means that when you're dealing with this on a social scale, there's going to be a certain amount of unacknowledged guilt that is just begging to be transferred onto a scapegoat. And if you can find somebody who's some
Yeah.
group whose sexuality is weird enough that you can vent on it but not feel guilty for doing so because it's something you can distance
Yeah.
yourself from, like that's always going
Yeah.
to be a convenient target. Like the fact
Yeah.
that it was HIV in the
Yeah.
80s, the fact that it's monkeypox now, like completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with why
I
people
think
are
it's
scapegoating the gay community. It just doesn't.
I think it's also like a tactic to avoid feeling
Yes.
helpless. Like diseases can seem so senseless,
Mm-hmm.
so
And they kind of are.
out of the blue, so impossible to manage. And so whenever when you can find a scapegoat, whether it's another country or a particular demographic or something like that, it feels more contained just by conceptualizing it as located in a particular place that is not
Mm-hmm.
you. Um, and so there is like a survival feeling, like, oh, I have to make it through this pandemic. I have to make it through this disease.
Mm-hmm.
I have to blame someone so the disease is far away from me.
Yep.
Um, and so for a lot of people, it's like this monkeypox thing, another pandemic already. We can't handle this. The facts are that it's mostly men who have sex with men who are getting it right now. It's them. It's
Mm-hmm.
them. We don't have to worry about it. It's them. And I don't know, that dynamic, it helps me to like have compassion upon people who are thinking this way because it's really them trying to make sense and feel at
Hmm.
peace in the world. But it also is like that's the mechanism that is hurting us is
Yeah.
blaming a specific group so that another group can feel safer. I don't know.
100%.
Um, Gabriel,
It
I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, it also reminds me there's a couple of book length essays by Susan Sontag on disease and metaphor and how throughout history diseases um, have been connected to certain character traits, like tuberculosis is connected to like melancholy, and like cancer was connected to like um weak, I don't know, like a lack of like liveliness or something like that, like moral, like character flaws. And
We to
later
being a
on, she
Pisces,
connects. She's
or
what's
ennui
that?
to being a Pisces.
Yes,
I actually have read a little bit
exactly.
of like 19th century astrological texts, and they, for some reason, really did have it in for Pisces. Apparently, it was just everyone agreed, man, Pisces blows. Anyway, bit of a tangent there.
But later on, she connects AIDS, like she unearths these connections that people make between AIDS and a certain character flaws. And I think that's another dynamic at work, is like disease is so easily connected in people's minds to certain flaws of character or
Right.
virtue.
It's promiscuity, it's recklessness, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And like, I'll freely admit, a big part of the reason that I wound up with this disease was that I personally was being reckless. But
Mm-hmm.
like, the idea that that's a good explanation for an entire demographic of people is, it's pure moonshine. Um, Lindsay Ellis a
Yeah.
few years ago made an excellent video on Rent and why it's bad. Um, but one of the
Okay.
things that she highlights just in passing in there is that, like, you know, while the epicenter of the original HIV outbreak was the queer community, like, there were a lot of other risk factors. Like she says in so many words, the 1980s were a terrible time to be a hemophiliac, which, like, that's literally a genetic disorder. It has nothing to do with how you behave.
Yeah.
And like, that's just one example, but
Yeah.
it's illustrative.
For sure. For sure. You were going to ask something, Henry?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask him a couple more questions, just specifically pertaining to him before you wrapped up. But Gabriel, what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions about living with HIV that you encounter? And has anything changed in your personal relationships just because of any of those things?
Honestly, the biggest misconceptions that I know of were misconceptions that I had before I was diagnosed. Um,
Yeah.
and like, I don't know that I could say that it's affected my relationships much. Like, it did definitely give me a new appreciation for certain of my close friends who were among the first people that I told when I was, first coming to grips with it. Because, oh
Yeah.
man, I tell you what, like, if I knew then what I know now, like, this would have been less scary, but it was still scary and would have been no matter what. Like, sitting alone in that room at the clinic and getting that news from a total stranger. As far as those misconceptions go, and I kind of feel like I'm saying this mostly, to the people who listen to this who maybe wind up with this diagnosis someday. Um, like, like I
Mm.
mentioned earlier, like, this is so far from what it was in the 1980s that even things like having biological children is no longer off the table. Like, it's just a
Yeah.
radically
Mm-hmm.
different situation. Um, that is not to say that it is, that every case of HIV is created equal by any means. But like, almost everything about having a normal life, including life expectancy, like, is available to you as an HIV positive person in the 2020s. Um, like, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That leads into, another, you've partially
mm,
answered it, but when it comes to sharing your experience with other folks who end up with a positive HIV diagnosis, maybe even specifically Side B people with like additional layers of shame there, um, what is the advice you'd have, or what? what would you say to encourage, encourage them in the midst of that
Mm-hmm.
process?
I think the thing that I'd say is just to uh, focus on processing and talking to people at your own pace. Because if there's anything that has really stood out to me about my experience with this disease, it's how incredibly undramatic it's all been. Like, basically, I was kind of expecting this to be a big deal, and it kind of hasn't been. That is not to say that everybody will have that same experience that I have.
That experience. Yeah.
But yeah, like, just the primary advice that I would give is like, in this day and age, I think most people, although they probably have some misconceptions about how serious the disease is in practice and probably think that it's a bigger threat to your health than it usually is. There aren't very many people, or at least I haven't met any people who are going to shun you because you're pause.
Yeah.
The world doesn't work like that anymore. Like, people know that it's not, transmissible through coughs or whatever. So, like, you both should and can afford to, sort of sit with your feelings and process them at your own pace. Talk to people when you're ready to, and not rush yourself into anything, or feel like you need to delay or conceal. Just take care of your feelings, and do what you need to for yourself, because most of the other stuff is probably going to be taken care of if you're living in 21st century America, or socioeconomic equivalent thereof in other parts of the world.
Yes. Yeah.
For that matter, you might actually have better healthcare if you live somewhere other than America. We're not better.
If any listeners would like to invite me to their country with better health care, I would love to join you. I'll uproot my life. Just kidding. Well, kind of. One of the questions that we have been asking a lot of our guests this season is sort of related to that, that mode of advice, but more focused on your younger self. So I feel like this is a very common queer icebreaker question, or like queer interview question. But so imagine your 13-year-old self, your younger self, whatever age, but and meeting them, what kind of advice would you share with them, knowing what you know now? Your younger, it's typical for queer people, but your younger self is probably terrified about.
100%.
They're very scared of you, but like, what would you say to your younger self?
So I feel a little bit goofy saying this, but I'm gonna go ahead and
Oh, I
say it
love that.
anyway, just in case it's useful, because I feel like it might be for some people. Honestly, I don't think I would tell my younger self anything, because he wouldn't listen. I know me. Well, no, I do. I know me from my dad and I used to watch and rewatch Alice in Wonderland all the time when I was younger. It's an underrated classic of sort of that golden age period of Disney. Like, just beautiful animation and just wonderfully handled. But like, from the time when I was a little kid, Alice's song, "I give myself very good advice, but I very seldom follow it." Like, Even when I was little, it wasn't just that I liked the song, it was that I had a sense of recognition, like, oh, that's gonna be
Yeah.
a theme, isn't it? Like, not in the movie, but in my
Oh
life.
no, is this
I was
foreshadowing?
right. The foreshadowing fairy
Yeah.
came early. And you know how I feel about fairies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but so yeah, I honestly probably wouldn't tell my younger self anything. Like, I really think I would just give him a hug, sit with him for a while. Like, that's
Oh.
what he needed.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, I think I've said it probably a couple times throughout this season, that it's like this quote, I think we probably all heard variations of it, but like, be the person you needed when you were younger. It's like, you needed someone to give you a hug, so there you go.
Yeah. I do wonder how your younger self would react to you hugging them.
I think he'd actually be okay with it. Like, it was
Oh.
it was one of the few deep emotional needs that I wasn't terrified of for whatever reason. I think just because it was such a ravenous need that that I couldn't
Yeah.
waste time being terrified of it.
Terrified of it. Yeah.
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 That makes sense.
Yeah.
13's a rough
Well,
year.
Yeah, I think
13 was a rough year. Would not relive.
no. Yeah, actually, I probably would not relive any year of my life, but
Not even knowing what I know now.
You have been through a lot, girl.
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
Oh Lord.
Gabriel, it has been such a joy chatting
Thank
with
you for
you.
having me. So glad to be here.
And thank you so much for being so open
For sure.
about a subject where I'm sure there's, lots of baggage that you've waded through. And so thank you for sharing the fruits, the fruits of your reflection and your struggle with
Get it?
us. Like, we're very thankful.
Get it?
Yeah.
Because
Get it? Get it?
like fruits of the spirit, but then also fruits of research, metaphorically.
Yeah. And we're fruits. It's multi-layered.
Oh, my
Wait, how are we
goodness.
fruits? I don't follow.
Oh, you don't follow? Okay. Oh my gosh. But I'm hoping that was
Anyway.
I have to say, this is easily one of the most chaotic episodes I've been a part of.
Yeah, it has been pretty chaotic. I really do think
I'm
that
touched.
sometimes chaos is a gift that we bring to our audience.
I think so too, because like we gotta shake things up for him a little bit.
I would
right?
not have dared to dream that
We're
I,
real
of all
people.
would be
Yes,
one of the
exactly.
most chaotic. I am so flattered.
Yes, we'll send you a plaque in the mail.
I'll hang it in the bathroom.
Oh my god, you know we should
Most
talk.
chaotic.
Grant, we should start giving out awards to like people we interview at the end of a season. Can you imagine? Oh my gosh.
Most chaotic goes
Oh my god,
to...
okay. We're having the Live on Side B Awards at Revoice. Oh my god, we're doing this. I swear.
Oh gosh.
I'm in favor.
Well, perfect.
I realize I have a vested interest, but I'm still in favor.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
Well, thanks once again.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Until next time.